hard to believe we've gone through 4 weeks already in February, and we are finishing our series on the book of Proverbs. We could go on and on. There are so many things that we can learn from the book of Proverbs, and I hope that you've taken advantage of the perhaps the reading plan that's been in the newsletter, that you can go through and just read through the book of Proverbs at a fairly easy pace. And if you haven't done that, it doesn't mean that it's too late. Hopefully you can think about doing that if you haven't done it already, and just take it in. Take it in slowly, and just the little pieces of wisdom that are offered there, so good. We're going to look at a few this morning again, and I just want to pose this question to you this morning. Do you actually desire wisdom? Do you actually desire wisdom? And I hope that the answer is yes, because we've learned already that wisdom is your life. So if you like your life, or you desire to have a vibrant, good, healthy life, then wisdom is a good key to that. And wisdom, we said, is knowing what's right and doing what's right. It's not just knowing it, but knowing it and understanding it and doing it. It's about information, it's about understanding, and it's about action. And we didn't want to simply be simple. We don't want to just stop with knowledge, but simple people lack knowledge. And foolish people, not perhaps just knowledge, but they lack understanding. And then those we talked about as mockers were lacking humility and discipline. None of us want to be a simple person or a foolish person or a mocker. And yet, we sometimes live in those realms where we are harmful not only to ourselves, but to other people. And when you think about it for any length of time, you say, I don't want to do that. And yet we do, because we're lured into it by an enemy who wants us to be simple and foolish and to live the life of a mocker, because it serves his agenda and not God's agenda. So we have the opportunity not only to choose wisdom for ourselves, but to extend that wisdom to others. We not only get to choose life for ourselves, we get to extend life to others. We talked about last week that when you go and you live your daily life, every day that you live, on the corner of wisdom and folly, two voices will be calling out to you. Wisdom will be calling life, and folly will be calling death. But the interesting part is, folly will be so draped in what appears to be good that we get lured toward folly's house. And as soon as we go inside, we see that it's a place of destruction. It's like the grave. Here's what we know, is that wise people choose truth, they speak truth, and they live truth. If you haven't written that down, you can think about that. They choose truth, they speak truth, and they live truth. And it all starts with fear of the Lord. What does it mean to fear the Lord? Someone asked me, legitimately, and I thought a great question, because they said, do I have to be afraid of God? And the answer is no, but yes. No in the sense of no, it's the point of the word fear. It's a hard translation. It's really about being in awe of God, being reverent before God, committing your obedience to God. But also understanding, just like a good father, you still want to be respectful and honoring and understanding that someone has authority above you because they love you. So wise people choose to live according to that authority. Wise people choose life. Wise people choose to change other people's lives. And wise people choose truth. They receive it and they speak it. They choose what's better. We said, would you rather have a nickel or a dollar? Would you rather have a dollar or $100 bill? And we said context matters, because if that nickel or that dollar was hard-earned, or that dollar or $100 bill was counterfeit or stolen, it would make a difference, I would think, to some of us. It talked about the difference between being poor and yet having much, or rich and having little. It's better to be poor and to have love and righteousness and wisdom and peace and blamelessness than to be, quote, worldly rich and to have turmoil and hatred and foolishness and injustice and strife and a lying tongue and contrary lips. It seems like a good choice. Choose what is better. Choose to fear the Lord. Matthew 6:33 said, seek first his kingdom and his righteousness, and everything else will fall into place. Do what's right in the Lord's eyes. Do what's wise before the Lord. Be holy. Be full of integrity. And your life will then not risk disqualification. Think of when you play golf. If you're a professional and you go through a golf match and you go and you have to write down your score. If you've written down the wrong score, if you, even by one stroke, you write down the wrong score and you present it and it's incorrect, do you know what the consequences of that are? Disqualification. And sometimes in our lack of wisdom, we think, oh, but it's just one score. It's just one little area of my life where I'm not being wise. It's just one little tick of the box. And yet we do, for a season in our life, or for what seems to be an extended season of our life, we get disqualified from things that we were never meant to be disqualified from. We're meant to receive the fullness of his provision for us, the fullness of his wisdom, the fullness of his blessing. And yet, when we pursue other things like fame or power or riches instead of humility and self-control and respect, we then disqualify ourselves from the best that he has for us. To give you a pretty vivid comparison of just what it's like between wisdom and folly, I just want to point you toward one of the scriptures you may have read. It's a bit obscure, and it's in Proverbs chapter 17, verse 12, and it says this: "It is better to meet a bear robbed of her cubs than to meet a fool in his folly." So what it's saying is, hanging around with fools is scarier and more harmful than a mama bear who's just lost her cubs. Now, how many of you would be scared of a mama bear who's just lost her cubs? I would. Clearly I would. Forget about the cubs, just the bear alone, no matter what. It could be the friendliest looking bear ever. I would be freaking out. And yet it says that hanging around fools, to meet a fool in his folly, is scarier than that. Can you hear the imagery that the wisdom writers are trying to offer? To the positive, though, in Proverbs 13:20, it says, "He who walks with the wise grows wise." Find some wise people to walk around and grow in wisdom. That's how it's going to happen. But it says this: "The companion of fools suffers harm." It's very straightforward. Plan who you spend time with. In Proverbs 3:5-6, it said, "Trust in the Lord with all your heart, and lean not on your own understanding, but in all your ways acknowledge him, and he will keep your paths straight." Those are the things. When you trust in him, you can understand that your wisdom is going to lead you in the right direction. But your friends, and I want to speak specifically your foolish friends, for better or worse, will help determine your outcome. Your wise friends will also help determine your outcome, but they will be different outcomes. Our relationships matter. I want to read for you Proverbs 16, verses 1-3. "To humans belong the plans of the heart, but from the Lord comes the proper answer of the tongue. All of a person's ways seem pure to them, but motives are weighed by the Lord. Commit to the Lord whatever you do, and he will establish your plans." You know, the scriptures tell us very clearly that it is important to plan. We understand that God is sovereign, but we must choose wisdom. And there's a threefold choosing. It's commit ourselves to God. That's what these verses are describing. In verse 1, it says, commit yourself to God. You may have plans, and that is good, but then commit to planning, and then commit your plans to God. So commit to God, commit to planning, and commit your plans to God. That's what it's saying in these verses. It's telling us that he wants us, just like Moses and Joshua and Nehemiah, to plan our steps. He wants us to plan for our family, and he wants us to plan for our finances. He wants us to plan for that future home that we might live in or that we'd like to keep. Plan for our spiritual development, and he wants us to plan. It says in Proverbs 19, verse 21, many are the plans in a person's heart, but it is the Lord and his purpose that prevails. Many of you in this room could run a business. Many of you could help people who are in need, whether that be in health or maybe it's as a teacher. Maybe it's something you can do well. You're a good communicator. Maybe you're able to go and help people and encourage people. You can do all of those things, but you know, you can all do those things with earthly wisdom. But he says in Proverbs 24, verses 3 and 4, by wisdom a house is built, and through understanding it is established, and through knowledge its rooms are filled with rare and beautiful treasures. See, it's according to wisdom that the house is built. You can help to build a house, but will it be filled with the treasures that come from the knowledge that is a result of the fear of the Lord? It is important that we not only commit to God, but commit to planning and commit our plans to God. We enter that planning with humility, it says in the book of James. Those who plan with fear of the Lord are wise, and their building is secure, and they're filled with rooms of blessing for themselves and for those in their lives. I don't know if you know this, but earthly fear actually leads to competition. We talked about the fame and the fortune. When we pursue those things, we end up living a life which is against those that we are living beside, those neighbors that we are meant to love. And yet, godly fear leads us toward love and service and sacrifice. So the question for you as we enter into the final verses of this good and wise book, where are you planning? Where are you investing with fear of the Lord? Are you doing that with your relationships? Are you doing that with your finances? Are you doing that with your schedules? Are you doing that with your walk with the Lord? It talks about planning in this book that we're about to read in Proverbs chapter 30, and if you have it, that's fine. I'm just going to take you through just a few things through that, the early part of the chapter leading up to verses 24 to 28, which is ironically going to be a very short part of this morning's message, but a very powerful part. In chapter 30, it talks about humility. This book starts from the title that says Sayings of Agur, and I can only assume that this is a person. I don't think it's Solomon, although Solomon wrote many of these. It says, the sayings of Agur, son of Jakeh, an inspired utterance. This man's utterance to Ithiel. So there's this conversation, but it's inspired. It's from the Lord. And he says in these first 3 verses, I am weary, God, but I can prevail. Surely I am only a man. I am just a man, and I have human understanding. I do not have human understanding. I'm even less than human, it seems. I have not learned wisdom, nor have I attained the knowledge of the Holy One. He's just putting himself, it's hyperbole to say, compared to you, I know nothing. I am in desperate need of you. Your wisdom is what I need. It goes on in the next section. It's just this reverence for God, saying all the things that God has done that we could never do. In verses 5 and 6, it talks about the power and integrity of God's word. And then he has a prayer for integrity for himself. And he asks for 2 things. In verse 8, he asks for 2 things. And let me read it. It says, keep falsehood and lies far from me. So keep the lies, the untruth, far from me, which is probably inversely to say that I want all of your truth and all of your wisdom. And then he goes, and the second request is, give me neither poverty nor riches, but give me only my daily bread. Those are wise words. Just keep the lies from me and provide for me what I need. That's a good prayer for us. It goes on and says the opposite of wisdom. It describes the idea of what folly would be described as. In verses 10 through 15, we see that folly would be described as those who slander, those who curse, even their mothers and fathers, those who are filthy with their tongue or of their heart, those who are haughty, those who are disdainful, and those who devour the poor from the earth and the needy from among mankind. They serve their own needs first. And it describes them in verse 15 as leeches, those who have nothing other than concern for themselves. They're like a parasite. In verses 15 and 16, it describes things that are never satisfied. And this is what folly is. Folly never satisfies, and folly will never be satisfied. And folly will never satisfy you, although you may think for a time it will, but folly will never satisfy, and it is never satisfied. It's things like this. The grave is never satisfied. It always wants more death. Dry land like a desert is never satisfied. It always wants more water. A fire will never be satisfied. It always wants more fuel to burn. And folly will never be satisfied. It will always come after you. And when you pursue folly instead of wisdom, you will never be satisfied because there's always more. I think of people like I've been there who get on their phone and they think if I just watch one more click, one more video, I'll be satisfied. And you get to the next one and the next one and the next one and the next one. And guess what? You're never satisfied. You will never be satisfied if you pursue folly. It goes on, it talks about mockery. It talks about all of these things that folly can never do for you. But then in verse 18, there are three things that are too amazing for me, describing this like wisdom. Wisdom satisfies like no other. It amazes me like no other. There's a beauty like no other when I look to wisdom. Here are the things that they describe. The way of the eagle in the sky. You should just be able to watch an eagle for hours if you really think about what is happening in your sight. Unbelievable and beautiful. The way of a snake on a rock. Now, many of us probably wouldn't like to think about snakes for very long, but when you think about the mystery of how they move, how they can go across those sharp and jagged rocks with such ease, that should amaze us. The way of a ship on the high seas, something that should be overpowered by the water, seems to have control as it navigates the water like it's on a path. And then finally, the way of a man with a young woman. The idea of true and pure love, even sexual love between a man and a woman. Just how amazing that is when it is done right. When that relationship is pure. Those things are amazing to me. That's the idea of just how amazing wisdom is. And then it gives a description of an adulterous woman, which is the antithesis of this true love. Because adultery, in its context here, is callous and senseless behavior. In the next 3 verses, he talks about disorder. Saying God did not intend disorder, but order, because disorder is unbearable. And then as we are entering into these 4 verses, maybe 5, verses 24 through 28, 24, 25, 26, 27, 28, math major here. 5 verses. I want us to read them together because here's what it's telling us. As we're wrapping up this book, it's saying, if you wanted to know about wisdom, please read the book. But this is something he gives to us as a gift. In verse 24, it says, 4 things on earth are small. Have you ever felt small? When you think of the billions of people in this world, you should feel small. When you think of the vastness of this world and this universe, you should feel small in many ways. 4 things on earth are small, yet they are extremely wise. If it says that these characters, these creatures are extremely wise, it would intend to me that we have something to learn from these very small creatures. So I have a picture that we can put up here just briefly, if you don't mind, just to take a break. These are the 4 creatures we're going to talk about this morning. We're going to talk about the ant. We're going to talk about, does anyone know what that is before we even look? That's like a rock badger or a hyrax or a coney. And this is, you're probably going to say something, but it might be something else. That's a locust. That's right. Not a grasshopper. It's a locust. And this is a lizard of some sort. Or a gecko. And so what I want to do this morning is I want to just briefly take us through these 4 verses, or 5 verses, I guess, and see what is it we can possibly learn from these 4 little creatures. Let's take a look. Let's read. Let's go back to the scripture. We'll read it. In verse 25, it says, ants are creatures of little strength, yet they store up their food in the summer. Hyraxes are creatures of little power, yet they make their home in the crags. Locusts have no king, yet they advance together in ranks. And a lizard can be caught with the hand. yet it is found in the king's palaces. You may, as you're reading that, think of those creatures and how it is that we could equate those to being wise creatures. But let me just take you for just a second. Let me just divert for a moment to take you to a little article that I was reading a time ago. And we've talked about this type of idea for, as I get older, I'm always wondering, what does it mean to stay healthy and perhaps even live long in my life? I have the privilege of my dad's still alive. He's 85. And I think, how long will he live? We have longevity in our family, well into their 90s, some of the people in my family. But I think, what does it actually take to have long life? And it was recorded in this particular article that there were, and I'm just going to put them together in 4 blocks. The first was hard work and exercise. The second was rest and renewal of the body and the mind. The third was community and eating food in community. And fourth was having purpose and determination. Okay, so let me just say those briefly. So that's like hard work and exercise, rest and renewal, community and even eating communally together, and then purpose and determination to carry out that purpose. Let's see how that lines up. Because I think in that article, they were just rewriting the scripture. I think it's actually here, right here. In verse 25, ants are creatures of little strength, yet they store up their food in the summer. It seems quite clear that ants are hard workers. Have you ever seen ants at work? I have ants around my house. I'm sure you have ants you've seen in your communities or even around your house. And they work really hard at the times when it is important to work. They work like crazy in the summer. I wish they didn't in many ways because they just seem to be all over the place. But they're hard at work and they're doing a job. They're planning and preparing. They work in the summer to plan for the winter. They are organized. They share together. They are disciplined. They're busy, but they're not lazy. They work together in team and they persevere and they're fast. I don't know if you've seen that. They're actually really fast. They plan ahead. They store up and they have a plan and they execute a plan. And it goes back to those verses or those thoughts of committing to God, committing to planning and committing your plans to God. These ants are committed to one another. They're committed to the planning, and they're committing their plans to one another. Like they're working in team. Sports teams know this well. What it means to not only be committed to the plan, but commit to one another and carry it out. And so they plan. They work hard, which is good. But, going to the article, thinking about exercise and hard work, these ants are hardworking, and they are always at work. But yet for us, if you aren't aware, the statistics would say that we as a people, generally speaking in Canada, maybe the winter is part of this, we are fairly inactive. We're fairly inactive. We could be more cognizant of how it is that we exercise and are hard at work at the times when we could. Over the years, they've had lots of suggested requirements for exercise and food and all these things, and I know that they change all the time. But at one point, it was identified that there should be 30 minutes of fast-paced or heart-racing exercise 5 days a week. That's what it would take for you to meet the minimum requirements of having healthy exercise in your life. And do you know at that time of the article, do you know what the percentage was of people who actually did that in our nation? 15%. 15% of women, 15% of men hit that mark. You know what was even scarier is that 10% of boys and 5% of girls hit that mark. We're fairly inactive. And I don't say this to get on a health kick. I'm just saying that it's good for us to think about how is it that we, in our lives, are we hardworking people? Do we exercise? Do we care about planning? Do we think about moving ahead? Are we like the ants? Are we hardworking? Do we prepare well? Do we plan well? Do we do it in season so that in the next season we can have those results that we're looking for? It's important that we're hardworking, that we actually go through the motion for our own benefit, for life. The second part is the verse about the hyraxes. Hyraxes are creatures of little power, and yet they make their homes in the crags. I mean, can we just go back to that picture for a moment? This isn't a very intimidating creature. Okay, they sit in the sun and they lay out because they need the heat to gain energy for their bodies, which can get cold otherwise. They lay over each other. They're out in the sun. They're just hanging out. But when the enemy comes, do you know what happens? They know where to go. They know exactly where to go. They rest in the sun to survive, and they know where to find their safety, and their safety is found in the rock. Now, did that sound spiritual? Yes, it did. I'll take it back. Think of it from a Christian perspective. They have to rest in the sun to survive, and they need to know where to find safety, and they need to know that that security is found in the rock. They have an incredible ability to get to the rock, into the crags, to the places where the enemy cannot reach, and they go there and they can find their rest. You know, God gave us his word for renewal, that we would find rest in his word. And my choices, whether to rest or not, we think, oh, that just depends on me. My choice is to rest or find renewal in my mind and in my spirit. That's just about me. But let me tell you, from a physical perspective, when you rest, let me go with the other perspective. Without rest, you then have an increased opportunity to be in an accident. You have increased possibilities for depression and forgetfulness and aged skin and decreased learning ability and heart issues, and you have your judgment impaired. Have you ever gone on a long drive late at night and you knew after a while when you were fading and your eyes were flickering and you knew that you should pull over and you didn't, but you know you should have? Because you know that when you are on the road, and I did this, I still remember to this day, it was a monumental moment when I was driving my daughter back from Moncton from a concert, and we got back late at night. Now, it was late at night for me. Late at night for me is not late at night for a lot of you, but late at night for me, and my eyes were fading, and my head was nodding, and I realized at that moment, I got home, but I realized I put my daughter's life at risk. I said, I will never do that again. I will never do that again. I've never done that again. I'll pull over because it's wise to do that. I don't want to increase someone else's risk. You know that those of you who get less than 5 hours of sleep a night, you are at 2 times the risk of death than someone who gets rest. You need rest. Your choices to rest or not affect others. And so God gave us this opportunity to rest in him. He gave us the opportunity to rest in the sun. He gave us the opportunity to find security in the rock. He says to us, come all of you who are weary and heavy laden, and I will give you rest. He wants you not only to work hard and to exercise and to meet that standard, but he wants us then to find our rest in him. We need both. You ever heard of the term neurobics? It's like aerobics for your mind. So when you're doing all those puzzles or you're doing something that's stimulating, you're just doing something that's, and I'm not talking looking at your screen. That's not what I mean. I'm just saying something that's going to exercise your mind in a way. And I think a good way to do that is just to be in his presence and in the word. We just need to be with him. God says you will find rest in me. Third, locust. Locusts have no king, yet they advance together in ranks. Now, one thing you probably know about locusts is that they love to eat. And they love to eat with friends. Right? They do. There's a difference between, by the way, the difference between a locust and a grasshopper is like the length of their antenna. But they consume lots of good things. And in fact, it says, if you talk about a health guy, and there are people here who can tell you much more than I could, but there's a problem that we have. It's not that we don't get enough calories. It's that we get the wrong types of calories. We do get a lot of our calories from snacking instead of from good, healthy, solid intake. And so when we find those things, you ever talk about the word antioxidants? We want foods that are rich in antioxidants, and we want foods that are full of vitamins and minerals and those things that are going to help our body. Consuming more of a good thing is not bad. And there's this difference, this idea that the locust comes and he just wants to consume. And in the eyes of us reading this, we think of the locust as our enemy, but he's saying that this is a very extremely wise creature, that we should just consume as much of a good thing as we possibly can. You cannot get enough of this good thing. You cannot get enough of wisdom. But also from a very practical point of view, eating together actually promotes health. It promotes social health. It promotes tighter families. When you have planned meals versus grazing, there's a better food intake. When those meals are planned, you eat together. There are benefits, especially for children, by the way, because they learn how to become part of a community. They learn how to be part of a conversation. They learn good manners. They learn how to serve one another and listen to one another and problem solve and compromise. All these things happen in the opportunity of just being together, eating together in community. There's actually another statistic that says if you eat alone, or not just eat alone, but if you are alone for too long, you know what happens? Your cortisol levels increase. You're not meant to be alone. I know that not only is God intended for some of you marriage to be with one another for life, and it's hard to believe this. This was a hard step for me to understand. That your life actually gets longer when you're married, which is shocking because of all the times when I'm sure you wanted to kill each other. You think your lifespan would be less, but it's actually increased. For men, married men, it's 7 years longer. And for married women, it's 4 years longer. Did you know that? And for any of you who God has made it that you are a single person, and that is beautiful. Did you know what? You should get a pet. Because those who have a pet, their life increases. Even then, they're not meant to be alone. A pet will increase your life. I don't know why. I'm not a pet lover myself, but yet something about just being in community. And what we can learn from the locusts who come together, they eat and consume together in the masses. And it's good. It's like when we are the church and we do things together and we are together and we are doing life together and we're eating together and loving one another and being there for one another, there's this beautiful wisdom. There's this beautiful benefit. There's this beautiful life that takes place. You know, you can't do the one another's in isolation. Those that come from the scriptures. And when we do the one another's, it's like a source of joy. It's like a shield from stress. So consume good things voraciously and live and work in community. And finally, a lizard. A lizard can be caught with the hand, yet it is found in king's palaces. We had a gecko once. The name of our gecko was Echo the gecko. And if you know this, Echo was like this, just put it on your shoulder. It was not hard to catch, right? Every once in a while, it'd be like, across the floor. But it wasn't really that hard to catch. And here it says, a lizard can be caught with the hand. That is clearly true. I mean, those things can be caught. But here's the thing. They're excellent climbers. And when they do get away, they live this life of purpose. They're defenseless, yet they persevere. And because of their small size, they can accomplish things that are usually inaccessible. And I want us to be reminded by this, that we too can accomplish incredible things, even in our small natures, that are great things in the eyes of Christ. We can become overcomers. We can go to the greatest places. Think of a lizard or a gecko being invited into the king's palace. They make their way there. They're able to get to those places because they have this plan and determination, because they've been given an ability that seems beyond what others can be given. And that's what wisdom offers us. It takes us into places that we could never go. It gives us access into places that we could never go if we didn't have wisdom. We can be easily captured. But that's what the king wants from us. He wants from us to be easily captured. He wants for us to be easily captured by him. He wants us to be consumed and be in relationship with him and to love him. He wants us to be hard workers. He wants us to find rest and refuge in him. He wants us to be in community and team and feed with one another. Feed on the good food that he provides for us, but also be fed by the word. And he wants us to have purpose and determination in living out our lives. And so the challenge for us is, in light of my past and my present and my future, what is the wisest thing to do? And I look to these creatures to be reminded, just like the ant, just like the hyrax, just like the lizard, just like the locust. How is it we can learn from them? How is it we can learn from the words so that I can think about all the things that I must do? How is it I can rely on the things and gifts that he's given me in his wisdom? How in the light of my past and my present and my future, can I ask myself, what is the wisest thing to do? Let me sum up and say, as I said last week, the enemy will do all he can to suppress the truth about God. But I want to tell you that as we see in Christ, because this is what Christ's life modeled for us. He was a hard worker. He was always with the people. He found time to rest and pray and found refuge in his Father. He was in community. He was always with other people. He was eating with them and loving them and healing with them. And he was finding ways to carry out the purpose and mission that he was called to do. And when we follow that mission wisely, then we can live in that wisdom. We can live in that same posture of honor and reverence and admiration and praise displayed to the God who loves us and that we love deeply in wisdom. We seek him and we esteem him and we savor him and we trust him and believe him and obey him and respect him and fear him and treasure him and cherish him and prize him and love him because he is God. And the beginning of knowledge is the fear of that same God who loves us deeply. The question is, just as we started, do you want to be wise? Well, I want to tell you that you can accomplish those things. Just like the small creatures that we've described this morning, you can get to places that you would never have been able to go otherwise if it were not for the wisdom of God. Commit to planning, commit to God, and commit your plans to God. Trust in the Lord with all your heart and lean not on your own understanding. Believe fully that the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. Not just knowing what is right, but doing what is right. And when you live that way, you say no to folly. And you say yes to this loving invitation from a Father who loves you deeply. Just like as we started in the beginning, that David loved his son Solomon, and Solomon loved his children. And it was like he took their faces by the hand and said, I want to tell you the most important thing, the most loving thing, the most cherished thing that I've ever learned in my life. I want to pass it along to you. I hope that's what we've been doing over the past 4 weeks. I hope it's just like the Father holding your hand and saying, I love you. I want to share my wisdom with you. Will you listen? Will you walk with me? Will you fear me? Will you love me? Walk in wisdom. It's a choice, a privilege that we get to make. Father, will you allow us to walk in your wisdom? May we give you all the credit for this great gift. May we learn from even the smallest creatures what it means to be extremely wise. And may we realize that when we walk in wisdom, not only does our lives change, the lives of those around us, as they see you in us. We give you praise. In Jesus' name, amen. I'll invite the team to close us today.